My members are scared. We have people who are scared to drink their water.
Tonight, Indigenous leaders in northern Alberta decry the lack of action over a tailings pond spill.
We haven't been acknowledged and we are one of the oldest schools, and I'll keep repeating that.
Métis survivors and elders appear at the United Nations.
We've heard for years the stories from Indigenous people about the bad outcomes.
And Alberta researchers take on the unequal treatment of Indigenous patients. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Indigenous leaders were in Ottawa on Monday to voice their frustration over the lack of action from both government and industry over a tailings pond leak. It started last year when contaminated water from a tailings pond for the Kearl Oil Sands project in northern Alberta began leaking into the surrounding environment. APTN's Fraser Needham has more from Ottawa.
Speaking before the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee on Monday morning, Mikisew Cree First Nation Chief Billy Joe Tuckero talked about the toll on mental health the ongoing situation is having on his membership.
My members are scared. We have people who are scared to drink their water, and we aren't even sure of how long our supply of drinking water is going to last in Fort Ship. People are stressed out. They are worried about their health.
Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation Chief Alan Adam said he has no faith in the Alberta Energy Regulator to hold project owner Imperial Oil to account.
The AER in Alberta is a joke, a complete joke. And if you all stand here and sit here with me and think about it, and you agree with it, then why am I here? They've been rubber stamping the industry for the last 40 years.
And Daniel Stukless, the Director of Administration for Fort McKay Métis Nation, said the spill should have never happened in the first place.
In the view of the Fort McKay Métis Nation, the events that have transpired are negligent. This has been avoidable from the start, and it should not have happened. To date, no one has been held accountable for the incident.
The NDP is calling for a full audit before any more tailings water from the Kearl Oil Sands project is released. And NDP MP Heather McPherson told the committee local Indigenous people have been let down on a number of levels.
As an Albertan, I'm sickened by the testimony that I've heard today, and I'm so sorry that you had to come again and demand the rights that every other Canadian takes for granted. You have been betrayed by the AER. You've been betrayed by Imperial Oil. You have been betrayed by the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta.
Speaking outside the House of Commons on Monday afternoon, Adam said he still can't understand why no one has been held accountable for the spill.
If I spilt a barrel of oil in the Athabasca River or Lake Athabasca, I guarantee you I'll be standing before the judge and probably be sentenced to jail.
Also on Monday, Ottawa announced it is taking steps to improve the reporting process for environmental emergencies like the one in Alberta. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Well, we'd like to hear whether you trust government and industry to clean up after spills like this. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send us an email to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on our website, aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. The Métis Nation Saskatchewan is taking the Ila lacrosse residential school survivors case to the global stage. They're presenting at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues this week in New York City. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
The Métis Nation Saskatchewan delegates include elders and survivors of the Ila lacrosse school. Vice President Michelle Leclerc says they're having a special panel at the UN to present because Métis leaders are struggling to be heard at the national level here in Canada.
It's important. Canada talks about, the fact that they are committed to reconciliation. Saskatchewan talks about the fact that they're committed to reconciliation. And as far as we're concerned, reconciliation means obviously reconciliation. We haven't been acknowledged and we are one of the oldest schools, and I'll keep repeating that.
Survivors launched a class action suit against Saskatchewan and Canada in late December 2022, saying the school operated in the same way as other residential schools. It was run by Roman Catholic religious groups with government funding and oversight, but survivors were excluded from the Indian residential schools and day school settlements. Leclerc says the experience of Métis survivors has been ignored for too long.
The Métis story needs to be heard. It needs to be told. Somebody needs to listen. And it was left off the list for whatever reason. And we know that, it shouldn't have been. And so, unfortunately, here we are in 2023, having to again file a fresh action against both Canada and Saskatchewan. And, we're left with having to take their stories to an international level.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Now, the Court of King's Bench in Saskatoon says neither the federal or provincial governments have responded to that class action. A decades-old act was back in the news recently, and it has First Nations leaders in Manitoba and Saskatchewan calling foul. The 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Act gave control over natural resources to the 4 western provinces. First Nations have been calling for the act to be rescinded since its inception because it contravenes the treaties. Saskatchewan and Alberta recently announced their own sovereignty legislation, but Justice Minister David Lametti invoked the wrath of the Western premiers earlier this month when he told the AFN he would, quote, look at the act. The Western premiers blasted Lametti and he backtracked. Chiefs in Saskatchewan and Manitoba are still urging Lametti to review the act, saying the treaties predate the act itself.
Well, first of all, I think the federal government has an obligation when we talk about the fiduciary responsibility when we look at treaty implementation and upholding those, of course, what was agreed upon.
I would rather see sort of a negotiation and some sort of resolve from everyone at the table. So I would think that the Prime Minister and Lametti, who had made these comments, would open up a table for discussion around this, have a national discussion.
Time now for a quick break. Still to come, a new project tackles how emergency room triage works for Indigenous patients.
And we have to come together at the end and figure out how are we going to make things better.
Welcome back. Follow up now to a story that our Chris Stewart brought us last year. A January 2022 report found that Indigenous peoples in Alberta were being triaged in emergency rooms differently than other patients. Now, the University of Alberta is working with Indigenous communities and organizations to help fix the troubling issue. Here's Chris with more.
A long-term study from the University of Alberta that looked at 11 million emergency room visits across the province showed that Indigenous people were not treated the same when being triaged for care. In some cases, the numbers are jarring. 33% of Indigenous people were triaged as less urgent than other patients. Now, the University of Alberta is beginning a 4-year project to help change those numbers. Dr. Esther Tailfeathers is a physician at the Kainai tribe in southern Alberta, and she is co-leading the project.
We've heard for years the stories from Indigenous people about the bad outcomes. Either they leave before getting seen because of their treatment, or treatment that is suboptimal and results in either greater morbidity or mortality.
8 Indigenous communities and organizations from across the province will be partnered with emergency departments in the project. It's an effort to ensure that Indigenous patients are receiving proper care and treated with respect. Dr. Patrick McLean co-led the triage study and this new project.
We think the core part of the project will be to build relationships between First Nations and the emergency departments that we select for the project, so that the First Nations can direct what needs to change in the emergency department, and really having those regular meetings and relationships between the department and the nations so that the departments are accountable and responsive.
We have to call out where we think these problems exist. We have to address them in a systemic manner. And we have to come together at the end and figure out how are we going to make things better, because at the end of the day, we want to change the health outcomes of Indigenous people across the country.
Meetings have already taken place and feedback has already helped.
We believe education of the providers is going to be part of the solution. So just culturally safe practices, not relying on stereotypes, seeing patients as individuals.
Dr. McLean hopes the project will lead to equal treatment for everyone when they visit an emergency room.
In an ideal world, it goes really well. Patients report fewer experiences of discrimination, better access to continuity of care after the ED, and then we can spread that to other hospitals in Alberta.
And create a framework that can be used at emergency rooms across the country. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister was in North Vancouver before the weekend to announce billions of dollars for healthcare funding. APTN's Tina House has more on that announcement.
The First Nations Health Council and the Government of Canada has an important announcement.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Patty Hadju, the Minister of Indigenous Services of Canada, were at the Squamish First Nation in North Vancouver to announce the renewal of the Indigenous Healthcare Equity Fund. The deal with the First Nations Health Authority will invest $8.2 billion over the next 10 years to provide more services and support for Indigenous people in accessing healthcare across Canada.
It will continue to support the FNHA in their work to design, manage, and deliver and fund First Nations healthcare in over 200 First Nations communities here in this province.
The deal includes flexible terms to allow First Nations to invest in the social determinants of health like culture and language, as well as income and even housing, all of which contribute to poor health outcomes. The fund will provide $354 million over 5 years to increase the number of nurses and other medical professionals in remote and isolated First Nations communities. $250 million over 5 years to further support recruitment and retention of health professionals on reserve. $825 million over 3 years for distinctions-based mental health and wellness strategies. $127 million over 3 years to foster healthy systems free from racism and discrimination, and $107 million over 3 years to continue efforts to transform how health services are designed and delivered by First Nations communities. Minister Patty Hadju says there is a lot of work to be done, and she is looking forward to seeing the positive changes.
This is a model that can be replicated. And when people all across this country understand that we are only as healthy as the sickest amongst us, that's when we'll really start to heal together.
After the announcement, the Prime Minister took questions from the audience in a town hall. Sutlut's daughter was murdered when she was in her early 20s. She was one of the first to ask the Prime Minister a question.
When you said you were going to implement all 231 calls to justice, that was the first time I stepped off the reservation to vote. And they still haven't been implemented, Prime Minister.
Obviously, there's a lot more work to do on ending the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across this country. We put forward the national inquiry. We accepted all the calls to justice, and we've put forward a national action plan with $125 million towards it as we move forward. But there is so much more to do, and you are right to highlight that.
Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
Great to see more town halls like that. Individual police members from across the country were honored in Ottawa on Friday as Governor General Mary Simon handed out the Order of Merit for those working in police services. She bestowed the honor upon over 100 men and women. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Some of Canada's top cops were at Rideau Hall Friday morning. Members of police from 4 Indigenous communities were among the investees. Governor General Mary Simon began by thanking them for their service.
Despite the challenges you face, you have all performed your duties with great honor and dedication. You represent the very best of what policing is and what policing could be.
It's a proud moment for Chief Gerald Swamp of the Rama Police Service. Swamp is president of the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association of Ontario. That organization recently filed a human rights complaint, which alleges the federal government underfunds First Nation police services.
I think police across the country has recognized that First Nation police services are at the same level in equality of the profession, of the work that we do. I think that's the government that has to catch up a little bit.
Chief Sean Delude is the chief of the Akwesasne Mohawk Police. He gained national attention 2 weeks ago when the bodies of 8 people were found in the St. Lawrence River. Delude says it's a great feeling being recognized for his 30 years of work, but his community remains on his mind.
Well, right now, it takes a second backseat to what, I concentrate my efforts on my job and not on what I'm receiving personally as chief of police, as an officer. So to answer your question, yes, but still my mind is on other things, as you know.
The director of the Nunavut Police Service in Quebec, Jean-Pierre LaRose, and Chief Hunter Blake from Tsunami Nation Police Service in Alberta were also among those honored. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Congrats to those who received the order. Time to step out for one more quick break. Still to come, a new documentary looks at Indigenous perspectives on tsunamis.
I really hope the documentary will bring up more discussions in these communities.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. While out during an early morning walk, our very own Lee Wilson came across this bald eagle perched near a body of water. Thanks, Lee. Great photo. If you have a photo to share, send that photo right now to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at Tuesday's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, 15 with showers for Fredericton, rain and 10 in Halifax. +2 for Kuujjuaq, -4 in Nain. 9 in Montreal, snow and +2 for Val-d'Or. +3 with flurries in Sault Ste. Marie, 2 above with snow for North Bay. 4 in Thunder Bay, sunny and 3 for Sioux Lookout. 0 in God's Lake, +4 for Norway House. 10 and sunny in Winnipeg, 9 under the sun in Barons River. 11 in Regina, +3 for Saskatoon. 4 in Meadow Lake and Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, rain and 12 at high level, 12 and sunny in Peace River. 10 for Edmonton, +12 in Lethbridge. 10 for Vancouver, showers and 9 in Victoria. 10 for Prince George, 8 in Smithers. -8 with snow in Old Crow, 6 in Whitehorse. 3 in Yellowknife, snow and -5 for Norman Wells. -12 in Sax Harbor, flurries and 9 below in Pawlatuck. Sunny and -5 for Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -13 in Resolute, 11 below in Iqaluit. A new documentary is exploring the history of West Coast tsunamis from an Indigenous perspective. Tsunami 11th Relative shows how combining traditional knowledge with ocean science can better prepare communities for tsunamis. Scientists say a tsunami may reach the west coast of Vancouver Island in the next 50 years. The new documentary was made in collaboration with several partners, including Ocean Networks Canada and 5 BC First Nations. It premiered last week with free screenings across Vancouver Island to follow.
So this type of traditional knowledge really, the 11th relative knowledge is really not many people are aware of it. So I really thought it was a perfect name for the documentary to just bring across and conjure up more conversations. And I really hope the documentary will bring up more discussions in these communities. And I hope to learn more history that was not in the documentary that I couldn't find.
In the nature of a true native marketplace, the Res Trade Show gathers every year. Business and vendors from a variety of fields come together to showcase Indigenous products and services. ICT's Mackenzie Allen Charmley has more.
Talking business and conducting business. The trade show and native art market are key for an immersive res experience. From art, jewelry, and apparel to tech and commerce vendors, talents and services of hundreds of Indigenous people are spotlighted.
So I'm here at Res to sell my artwork, but also I like sharing our Northern California and basket heritage. So I am selling, but I also am educating at the same time. A lot of even other tribes don't know that there's many California natives still around. So when I come to Native American events, I end up talking about my art, but I also talk about being a California native.
Besides handshakes and laughter, here you'll find businesses and vendors alike hoping to increase their economic growth.
Well, we do a lot of community projects already with First Nations communities up in Canada and with communities up in Alaska. And we just wanted to expand our, our opportunities and our products to give, the benefit for other communities.
With so much expertise in one room, connection is crucial.
We came here to really let people know about our business. So many times I hear people not knowing that there's a Native American CPA out there. And I just want to be able to let people know that we're here to really support them and make connections.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, which is the homelands of the Southern Paiute people, Mackenzie Allen Charmley, ICT News.
Good to hear from our relatives to the south. Now to some other members of the family who are being honored. The Canadian Association of Journalists held their annual conference in Vancouver over the weekend. APTN News was nominated for 2 journalism awards. And while we didn't win, a few former APTNers took home the Charles Burry Award. Former APTN News bosses, Gunnesatage Mohawk Dan David and Pikwakanagan Algonquin Karen Pugliese got the nod for inspiring change in covering Indigenous issues. CBC's Duncan McHugh and Jody Porter were also honored. Jody Porter posthumously, she passed away last summer. And congrats to all on the high honors, much deserved. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Monday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.